Hi everyone. How's the sound doing? Okay. So I'm Nick, and I'm part of the Healthy Active Cities team, and I was also part of the research as well. I'm going to very quickly talk about some of the findings relating to intermodality, and then I'm going to give a summary and some implications for future research and for future bike schemes indeed. So in terms of this chart here, we've got users and we've got deciders and we've got the whole sample. The key headline here is that if you look at the cars, users are much less likely to use cars in combination with a bike share trip. We'd hope also that users will combine a bike share trip with public transport, but if you can look, they are actually less than that average on the left-hand side. So is there implications here for the last mile? Some of the qualitative material in the research actually suggests that they are a good option as well. And we didn't really touch on it particularly, but there is a dichotomy between docked and dockless in this sense. So docked is usually better when people are coming out of a transport interchange, whereas dockless is often better when people are trying to get to one. So the next slide is very similar, and it shows what people would do in terms of replacing, and you have to kind of respect that the users will have already have done this maybe, so they might be more likely to know what they're likely to do. But the key headline here is that they would usually, in quite high numbers, replace walking trips. So there are some implications for activity. Possibly it means better activity because it's more strenuous, perhaps. But perhaps there's more implications as well for space. So do we need more space as well? And I'll come back to that in a minute. So just to now kind of go back to where we started, and we want the capabilities approach to be a robust and a practical way for people to understand using bike share schemes and managing them at a local and regional level. And by extension, actually increasing people cycling. And going through those types of conversion factors that Mags mentioned at the start, with the personal conversion factors, understanding how individuals are different and have different needs is really, really key. They all require different skills and they're all on different journeys towards being capable, in inverted commas, to use bike share or for any other travel change. And consequently, there's a large range of relevant stakeholders involved in addressing this. Individual health-related factor, this could be more of a medical thing, but for Mobike, the scheme that we looked at, there was clearly a lack of engagement in terms of people reaching out to actually encourage people to use the bikes, or people who might not have known how to access them. And this is where organisations such as Walk Ride GM and other organisations which really have that personal approach to helping people to begin to cycle or begin to walk more comes in. And for the environmental factors, well, we all know that the landscape, the physical landscape does need to change, and this is absolutely crucial to enable not only bike share, but also anything that isn't really car or road transport modes. So we know that the scheme itself, just implementing the scheme itself is not enough. The environment needs to be modified as well. And then finally, with the social factors, perhaps they're arguably a bit more complex because it's relating to group norms and cultures and things that take longer to change. This is where the work of TFGM and other organisations to balance inequalities is absolutely crucial. And on the next slide, we'll suggest some of those best practice examples. So, as always, with any research, you get more questions than you do answers. So we've got quite a lot that's actually come out of this, where we understand part of it, but there needs to be more understanding as well. There was you've seen some gender-related differences in the uptake of bike share, and there were some clear indications that women in general are less confident than men. Things such as knowing where routes are, things like cycling on busier roads are factors where there was a difference. And it's quite difficult to unpick how they are actually causally linked, but it is definitely likely that the overall confidence is a sum of lots of these different factors. So looking at different studies that have looked at this, a study by Hosford et al. Looked at why these differences might be. They were quite critical of bike share generally because it's a US study and it was seen as a great leveler of gender imbalance, and they looked at it as women are less likely to trip chain, and they need to understand how bike share can fit in with people's different individual patterns of travel. But also back to the infrastructure again, it's the safer infrastructure. You put that in place, you've got more of a chance of addressing those imbalances. In terms of the data set, we had some data on ethnicity, but we couldn't really pull out anything statistically significant. So I'm going to refer to a study a master student at Mags and Graham supervised, who found that actually policy on active travel really needs to understand social norms within different ethnic groups and communities to actually make any difference here. It also points out that there really needs to be more research as well, because it's definitely an under-researched area in academia. And the policymakers should focus on those social conversion factors as well that we've mentioned. Now, in terms of digital inclusivity, that's been mentioned earlier. There's a lot of reasons why being digital, it can exclude people. So two reasons could be age and income, but there's little evidence to suggest, actually, if you look across schemes, that there aren't many schemes here which are totally digital free, and it's a really big issue in trying to focus on how to support inclusion, because most schemes really, they need an app of some sort. In terms of geographical imbalances, we've also touched on this again. Centralized schemes, geofences, things that exclude people. Quite often it's people in the deprived neighbourhoods who don't have the access to the schemes. We found that Greater Manchester generally was quite complex because it's got the central area, but it's also got regional centres as well. And so in future, schemes really need to look at this. We've seen the filtered neighbourhoods as well, which are now trying to address that. And then finally, the design of the bikes, I won't go into much detail, but obviously for some people that was an absolute deal breaker. These newer schemes, hopefully there'll be lighter bikes. There might be e-bikes as well, which I think for some people it would actually reduce some of those barriers to actually taking up cycling. And then finally, I'm going to touch on two more very topical things. I don't know if anyone's actually noticed this, but yeah, there is a lot of changes in terms of the COVID pandemic. We've seen these charts like the one at the top left, which ends at the end of April. There's not so many since then, but it shows a trend of a lot less car use in cities, and especially after the dip in April and May. It's crucial that that dip stays down, and there's some evidence to suggest it's not doing so. So these findings, the findings on intermodality that I showed before, are really, really important, because quite a lot of people would actually replace a public transport trip with a bike share trip, and that would actually help reduce numbers on public transport for the next foreseeable future for social distancing. Also, the temporary infrastructure that we've seen going up really needs to be monitored really well. The behaviour of people using it, but also the behaviour of the car drivers. I was talking to someone earlier this morning, and apparently there's something like 30% more instances of speeding near to this type of infrastructure since before, 30% more than before the pandemic. So it's a real issue. And monitoring this kind of thing is going to help incoming bike share schemes. And then finally, we're living in a changing world in terms of mobility. There's a lot more coming into the mix. Many different modes, potential conflict between modes. You've got cargo bikes in the mix that might be using the same infrastructure. You've also got electric bikes, and you've also got scooters as well, which we're likely to see really, really soon on the roads. All of these things working together in what is still quite limited space needs to be thought about, especially when you're introducing a bike share scheme. There's a stat, it's something like 50% of road space, of space generally in cities is actually reserved for cars. That includes parking as well. So I think we can see that space is going to be very, very important. And so here's a bunch of references that we used, and I'm now going to finish off